Hello from Wexford, and this week we're going to do something mega exciting. I'm going to pot up my Amorphophallus. This is it here, and I've been growing this plant for 6 whole years. It started off as a tiny little bulb, but I think that this year is finally the year that it's going to flower for me. So this is where I do most of my potting, and the reason why I do it here on the greenhouse step is that it's much easier to clean up. At the moment anyway, there isn't enough space in the greenhouse to swing a cat. But even in the summer, if I pot up in the greenhouse, it makes a big mess that has to be cleaned up. And of course it's worse in the house. So I do a lot of work here, and you know, it's handy for moving plants in and out of the greenhouse when I'm finished. So these are my Amorphophallus bulbs, and I've kept them in the house dry over winter. I lifted them and stored them dry in this paper bag indoors because they really do like it a bit warm. And as you can see here, I've got a variety of sizes. That's a good big one, although not as big as the other one I showed you a minute ago. This is Amorphophallus konjac, by the way, I neglected to mention. And they range in size, can we see in there, from that size down to the teeny tiny, which is actually the size of the original bulbs I got. And the thing about this plant is that they do split and they do make more bulbs. So once you have one, you'll always be with them. So here we go, and this is the mix that I'm going to use to pot up my Amorphophallus in. And it's made up of, well, it has to be really well drained. So you need to use at least a quarter of materials like perlite or sand or grit. Now I don't have any sand this time round, so I'm using perlite, but the advantage of sand or grit is that it helps stabilize the pot, because these are quite large plants and they can be a bit top heavy and they can fall over. But I'm using perlite this time. And then for the rest of the mix, well, I just was reading recently that you should use some peat in there, but I can't say it's something I ever did before. I used just multi-purpose compost, but this year I'm putting some peat in to see what happens. And also they're heavy feeders, so I've put in a good dose of fish blood and bone into the mix and mixed it all up. So that's the mix. And then the next thing we need to know is what pot size to use. So here's my bulb again, bulb corm. I'm not quite sure what it is technically. And we need a big pot. Right, so I reckon for a bulb this size, we're going to need a pot like this big. Also bearing in mind that you have to keep the whole thing stable because it is going to be big. Right, so we'll put the bulb down there and just put some compost. Oh yeah, first of all, for extra drainage, what I've done is put some polystyrene chips at the bottom of the pot. This is always a great one even for orchids. I do it. And I'm going to just put some of the mix at the bottom of the pot like that. A bit more. God, I'm very awkward today, very clumsy. Okay, so I filled up the pot now and placed the corm in, and I've actually left a lot of space underneath the corm because it's going to have big roots that are going to need somewhere to go, and I don't want to bury it too deeply. So there it is. So there's my little beauty in there. I can't wait for this thing to flower now. After 6 years, it's going to be absolutely amazing. Okay, right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the corm, and I'm going to come a little bit up this kind of stem stalk kind of thing here. But obviously I've never done this before because I've never had one send up a lead this early on in the season. I've always been burying them when they're nice and dormant. Okay, so so I think that's about right. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to top it with grit, and like good proper decent sized grit like this. excellent. It can be hard to find, but kind of invaluable for all kinds of potting. And this will do a great job of like stopping any rotting around the neck of the plant, and it'll also help stabilize the whole thing as well, because as I mentioned before, this is quite a top heavy plant, so you know you need something heavy to stop the whole thing kind of landing on its face. So I'm going to water this plant now. Now with the watering, the important thing is, especially if the bulbs are dormant, is that you only water it once until it starts to grow. If you water it more than that, then it's going to rot off on you. These plants will rot off as soon as look at you. So water it once, and I'm going to bring this indoors where it's nice and warm. These are the little baby ones, and once I pot them, I'm going to make sure to just water them once and bring them indoors. And to get them going, I'm actually going to put them on a heat mat, because I didn't used to do that in the past, and what can happen is that they can just stay there all year and not come up at all, and just like spend a whole year not growing, which is actually pretty bizarre in the plant world. So they're going to come indoors and be kept nice and toasty until they get going. And once you see growth coming at the top of the grit, then you know you can water, but water sparingly, because the problem with these things is rotting off. So that's all about Amorphophallus, but I'm bound to make a video when this thing flowers in, well, I don't know how long, soon I hope. But anyway, thanks very much for watching, and see you again soon.